Here's a couple bonus chapters for everybody of Friday the 13th, The Jason Strain. Chapter 4. Dinah had drawn the short straw in the latest round of Who's Gonna Babysit Jason? So while Kenworth, Sanders, Levin, and Polk were up on deck getting suntans and playing cards, Dinah and R.J. Beck were stuck in the stuffy, dank hold, chilling with Mr. Personality. Having been down there for nearly 20 minutes, Dinah had come to the conclusion that she would much rather hang out alone with Jason for the rest of the trip than spend another 30 seconds enduring R.J.'s ham-handed pickup lines and extravagant stories of his own daring and manly adventures. R.J. was too handsome for his own good, and clearly had it way too easy with women. He had an almost girlishly pretty face, an underwear model body, and apparently figured that this made him exempt from such mundane concepts as manners, respect, or even tact. Dinah thought from the beginning that he was way too soft for this kind of work, but Kenworth swore he was solid. He was great for confidence, scams, and manipulation of individuals surrounding a given target, but most people were far more impressed by looks than Dinah. She put up with him on the team because she had to, but his endless come-ons were really starting to wear thin. The worst part about it was that RJ was supposedly one of Brian's best friends. It wasn't like Dinah and Brian really were an item. They had been on a few dates. Brian agreed to help bait Jason since Dinah, the only female, didn't feel comfortable making out with anyone else on the team. But there really wasn't anything solid between them. In fact, it had been awkward when Dinah left him waiting for the ambulance in order to complete the rest of the mission. She had squeezed his hand, wanting to say something comforting, something that a girlfriend would say, anything, but nothing came to mind. She tried to remember how good it felt to kiss him, but she felt shell-shocked and numb. "I'll see you later," she said instead. He nodded, trying not to let her see how much pain he was in. He held her hand for a moment longer, then let it go, and Dinah left. Dinah still didn't know how to feel about it, but she did know that she did not have any interest whatsoever in getting it on with Brian's sleazy pal while Brian was recovering or dying in the hospital. She gave RJ nothing but ice, but he did not seem at all discouraged. She concentrated on blocking out his voice and entertained herself by imagining pushing him over the railing or cutting off his head and blaming Jason. Meanwhile, Jason was still encased in the restraining foam with only his head free of the heavy, hardened goo. He had been placed between two layers of crisscross steel rebar, and the two layers were bolted together, trapping him like a piece of bread in an old-fashioned toaster. The whole contraption was then chained upright to eye hooks in the bulkhead. It wasn't pretty, but it seemed to work, so long as the foam held, and they kept Jason knocked out till it was time for his big primetime debut. Dinah kept thinking that she would get used to the big, undead lug, that having spent the last 12 hours in close quarters with him would have inured her to his presence, but he still disturbed her profoundly. There was something so unnatural, so utterly wrong about him. Dinah had dealt with a lot of bad men in the course of her checkered career as a professional gun for hire, but in the end, they were all men. This Jason, he was, well, something else. Every now and then that single good eye would skitter around beneath the wrinkled gray lid, almost as if he was dreaming in his tranquilized stupor. Dinah couldn't even imagine what could be going on inside that malformed head. "So," RJ said to Dinah, "what are your plans after we drop off Mr. Voorhees? Gonna take a little R&R? "I'm gonna go visit Brian in the hospital," Dinah said, "if he's still alive." "Oh yeah, sure," RJ said, a sudden wide-eyed look of fake sincerity on his face. "We should definitely do that." Dinah kept her breathing slow and even, refusing to allow him to get a rise out of her. "I know," RJ said, fishing a tiny digital camera the size of a credit card from his pocket. "Take my picture with Jason. Brian'll love that." Dinah rolled her eyes. "No, that's a really stupid idea." "Why not?" RJ walked over to Jason and rapped on the blank white mask with his knuckles. "He won't mind." "The lighting in here sucks," Dinah replied, a cold flush of uneasy fear filling her belly. "It's got a flash. Come on," RJ said, tossing the little camera to Dinah. Come on, it'll be great. Dinah shrugged and raised the camera, framing RJ and the bound Jason in the tiny view screen. RJ leaned in close and puckered up his lips as if ready to kiss Jason on the cheek. Dinah snapped a photo. One more, RJ said, reaching through the rebar to put his arm around Jason's lumpy, foam-encased shoulders and flashing a big, cheesy smile. Enough already, Dinah said. Just one more, please, RJ said. Fine, Dinah said. Scream! RJ opened his mouth wide in a goofy parody of a scream. Dinah sighed and pushed the button to snap another picture. Three things happened all at once. The flash went off, filling the claustrophobic space with white light. There was a loud, reverberating crack as the hardened foam surrounding Jason's right arm split off from the main bulk of his immobilized body. RJ screamed for real as Jason's foam-encrusted mitt reached between the rebar, grabbed RJ by his trendy, bedhead hair and started pulling him inexorably toward the raw end of a cut-off piece of rebar. Dinah dropped the camera and ran forward to grab Jason's hand and try to pull his fingers free of RJ's hair. They were as unbendable as the rebar. Get him off me! Get him off me! RJ hollered. Fuck! Get him off of me, please! Hold still! Dinah commanded, pulling a small survival knife from her back pocket and thumbing it open. Dinah began sawing through RJ's hair. Jason had such a tight grip that she had to cut the hair down to the skin beneath his huge gray fist. Ow, fuck! RJ said as Dinah's knife nicked his scalp. What the hell are you doing? I fucking told you to hold still, Dinah spat. You want me to save your stupid ass or not? The jagged piece of rebar got closer and closer to RJ's forehead, and he crossed his eyes trying to see it. Fine, RJ said, squeezing his eyes shut. Just hurry up, okay? Kenworth and Polk, alerted by the scream, came barreling in the door. Kenworth held the foam sprayer and Polk a Glock 21. They both wore terribly serious expressions that cracked into smirks when they saw what was going on. Almost there, Dinah said, cutting through the last strands of hair. Come on, please, RJ said. Finally, RJ was free, and he and Dinah tumbled together down and out of the way, leaving Jason with a fistful of hair and expensive pomade. Kenworth stepped in and hit Jason with another layer of the foam, trapping his free arm back against the rebar. RJ stood, rubbing the back of his head. He looked like he had been forcibly abducted by monks and jumped into their order. There was a large, mostly bald and bleeding patch at the crown of his head, and his face was bright, blotchy red. Smooth move, Friar Tuck, Polk said, holstering the Glock and shaking his head. It's a good look for you, Kenworth agreed. Fuck off, man, RJ replied. Dinah bent to retrieve the little camera. She fooled around with the buttons until she figured out which one showed photos already taken. The look on RJ's face when Jason grabbed him was priceless. I think I need an 8x10 of this one, Dinah said. Give me that, RJ said, reaching for the camera. Dinah handed the camera to Kenworth. He snickered and passed it to Polk. You're right, Dinah said to RJ. Brian is definitely gonna love this photo. Kenworth fired another tranquilizer dart into the immobilized Jason's neck, below his ear. The masked head rolled and tossed furiously for a few seconds, then slowed and slumped forward. All right, you two, Kenworth said. I think that's enough excitement for now. Now, Beck? Yes, sir, RJ said. I want them pants changed by 0100 hours. Everyone laughed, but Dinah's eyes kept going back to that cryptic, emotionless white mask. It was going to be a long trip. Chapter 5. Dr. Helen Kane stood before the doorway to her benefactor's private office, shifting her grip on the slick plastic folder that held her latest report. She was tall and distressingly beautiful, with the lush, curvy body beneath her sterile white lab coat. She looked as if she was about to take off her glasses, pull the pins from her thick chestnut hair, and start stripping on the table like some rock and roll video vixen. But if you gazed into her cold, clinical gray eyes, you knew that she never would. She refused to do the Mensa and lace routine. Her beauty meant nothing to her, and the reactions of men around her were far less interesting than the asexual division of bacteria in a petri dish. Dr. Kane had grown up surrounded by science, and more specifically, by microscopic killers. Her father, Lewis Kane, was a legendary research microbiologist who had been at the forefront of several critical discoveries regarding the role of the enzyme reverse transcriptase in RNA viruses. Her mother, Georgia, was a professor of biochemistry, whose classes were some of the most competitive and sought after in the country. They had waited until their late 40s to have their only daughter, and were always intellectually supportive, but emotionally distant. Helen inherited both their reserved, chilly demeanor and their lifelong fascination with those tiny, barely living packets of protein-coated nucleic acid, more commonly known as viruses. She also inherited their obsession with cleanliness. Both her parents were staunch atheists and cared nothing for godliness. But cleanliness, on the other hand, was critical in their line of research. That awareness of the ever-present microscopic villains clinging to every unwashed surface carried over into their home life as well. Helen understood this too, and took their dire warnings about unthinking contact with less than hygienically meticulous individuals to heart at an early age. Unfortunately, both her parents died less than 6 months before Helen graduated, valedictorian, from the Eberly College of Science at Penn State, so they never had a chance to see their daughter follow in their footsteps. After all their years handling some of the most deadly viruses on Earth, it was something much larger and far more mundane that did them in: a speeding SUV. Their Volvo was hit head-on by a drunken teenager, and both of them were killed instantly. It was tragic and shocking, but the ever-practical Helen felt it was not really a bad way for them to go. Her mother, in particular, had a horror of hospitals. Both her parents belonged to the Hemlock Society and were outspoken advocates of euthanasia. They had explained to Helen shortly after her 18th birthday that they both planned to commit suicide rather than ever allow themselves to be debilitated by disease. In the end, they didn't need the pills and plastic bag. In a way, Helen supposed they got lucky. They were on their way home from one of her mother's successful and prestigious lectures. They had stopped for ice cream in an uncharacteristically whimsical moment of indulgence when the accident actually took place. Helen imagined that they had both been content and satisfied at the moment of their death. Still, Helen was not able to shake this notion that even good death could be somehow avoided. There had to be a way, and Helen was determined to find it before her own date with an SUV. After the funerals, the sale of the modest family house and supervision of the donation of various papers, books, and other research materials to the library at Georgia's old alma mater, Helen went on to graduate school, working steadily toward a Ph.D. in immunology and infectious disease from SUNY Albany. Her fellow students did not care for Helen, but their scorn and whispering gossip meant nothing to her. She was thought of as a snob, an obsessive-compulsive spinster in training with no interest in campus social life. There were rumors that she was really a lesbian, but the truth was much more simple. She had absolutely no interest in multicellular life forms of any kind. Helen had never had any sort of sex that she was aware of. While her fellow students seemed interested in little else, she could not bother to take the time away from her research. She had imagined that students of microbiology would be more aware of the teeming bacterial and viral fauna lurking in each other's orifices, and therefore, like her, strive to avoid becoming disease vectors through that kind of interpersonal contact. She also did not understand the concept of leisure time. Any of Helen's time that was not taken up with required studies was spent on other, more interesting personal research. She had no interest in movies, books, or music. She had no hobbies. She was interested in viruses, nothing else. While most of the faculty did not care for the odd, chilly, and intense Helen, they had to grudgingly admit that she was genuinely brilliant. She passed every class with flawless grades and graduated at the top of her class. Immediately after graduation from SUNY, Helen scored a plum postdoc placement at the National Center for Infectious Diseases in D.C. Young Helen was thrilled by the unlimited access to the best equipment and most exotic and dangerous viruses. It was a dream come true, everything she ever wanted. However, that honeymoon was short-lived. She was let go only 3 months in for unethical activities. Helen never understood why the exploration of scientific concepts that were so logical and obvious could ever be deemed unethical. Ethics were for the weak. Haphazard and preposterous distinctions arbitrarily set up thousands of years ago by superstitious cavemen. As long as the scientific community allowed itself to be unfairly shackled by religious hysteria and outmoded concepts of right and wrong, there could be no real progress. When eccentric millionaire Thomas Dart approached her, she was hugely relieved to find someone who shared her views. He was an odd, quirky, modern version of J. Harvey Kellogg, obsessed with health, vitality, and most importantly, prolonging human life. The Dart Ranch was a multi-million-dollar Malibu spa retreat for celebs to come eat grass clippings and get high colonic enemas for $5,000 a day. Helen hated the place and the vapid Hollywood royalty that came there to do penance for their overindulgent ways. But she knew which side of her bread was buttered, and so she endured Dart and his macrobiotic acolytes. On the Dart Ranch, she had a large state-of-the-art lab and more cutting-edge equipment than the NCID. She had a never-ending supply of animal models, including expensive primates, and no annoying ethical restrictions. Her research was making slow, but steady progress. She felt inches from a major breakthrough and couldn't wait to get her hands on more human subjects. Her dream, her obsession, the thing that fascinated and compelled her ever since her parents' death, was the prospect of engineering a hybrid virus that would indefinitely prolong the life of its host organism. After all, what was a virus's desire? What did it strive for above all else? To survive and to replicate. A virus that allowed its host to live forever would be itself immortal, replicating endlessly without ever having to take that scary, uncertain air or blood-borne leap in search of a new host. She had been working mostly with various strains of herpes, a virus that was known to be a lifer in the human body. It had a clever way of burying itself deeply into the cortex of the human brain. She had some limited success in lower animal models, increasing the lives of mice to nearly twice their normal span. But even with Dart's money and influence, human models were hard to come by. As of yet, she'd had no success whatsoever with the few she had. There had been several ugly and traumatic deaths. Dart's minions obediently buried her sterilized failures under the organic vegetable garden. The celebrity guests were all so impressed by the big, healthy squash and tomatoes that thrived so beautifully at Dart Ranch. Dart had summoned Dr. Kane to his inner sanctum with the promise of something revolutionary, something that would take their research to the next level. Dr. Kane was skeptical. She always felt that Dart was erratic and shamefully unscientific in his sudden whimsical theories, but she knew it was in her best interest to listen exactly to what he had to say, with an oh-so-interested face, so that she could get back to doing things her way as quickly as possible. Besides, who knew? Maybe the old nutbar really had stumbled across something worthwhile. Dart's private rooms were million-dollar handcrafted replicas of primitive jungle huts, all bamboo and palm fronds and rough bark and woven hemp. Dr. Kane found it hilarious that all of the natural materials required to construct this absurd, eco-friendly sanctuary cost 1,000 times more than the mundane modern dwellings of the Los Angeles peasantry. Plus, all those rough, porous, and uneven surfaces were impossible to keep truly clean. The singing of endangered rainforest frogs were piped in over the hypnotic patter of dripping water and rustle of windswept leaves, nature's elevator music. Dart himself was in his late 60s, though he looked to be a hale and hearty 40. Blond, tan, smooth-cheeked, and possessing a rugged, athletic build, Dart sat behind a sprawling desk that looked for all the world like something rejected from the set of Gilligan's Island for being too unrealistic. He wore loose, rough hemp clothing that could have passed for prison pajamas made by the blind. On his large tan feet were uncomfortable-looking Chinese woven grass monk sandals. He was sipping some horrendous, lumpy, khaki-colored slop from a large, unwieldy wooden cup. The thought of all the happy bacteria vigorously reproducing in the cracks and crevices of a cup like that made her shudder with revulsion. She only used disposable plastic cups, plates, and utensils. "Dr. Kane," he said in his mellifluous preacher's voice, "how goes the good fight?" "I've prepared a written summary of the most recent human trials." Dr. Kane placed her slick plastic folder on his desk. It lay there, incongruously, like an artifact left by time travelers, on the rough surface of the ridiculous desk. "I feel we are closer than ever to real, quantifiable results, but I must have more human models." "My good woman," Dart said, seemingly oblivious to Dr. Kane's obvious distaste for such patronizing language, "you will be pleased to know that I have some exciting news for you. Something that may turn out to be the key we've been searching for." Dr. Kane waited silently for him to continue. Instead, he farted loudly and robustly. Dart was forever lecturing anyone who would listen on the disastrous effects of stifling the release of intestinal gas. He believed this unfair social stigmatization of a perfectly natural bodily function to be the cause of such diverse physical ills as sexual dysfunction, insomnia, depression, and tension headaches. Dr. Kane was used to his frequent noisy emissions, but she still could not help but feel he was doing it purely for shock value, like a little boy showing off his chewed-up food in the school lunchroom. Dart pushed a hidden button on his desk, and one of the rat-and-wall screens slid back to reveal a decidedly modern and quite unnatural plasma screen television. On the screen was a garish logo that read, "Extreme Elimination." For a moment, Dr. Kane feared it would be a film about enemas and defecation, but then the logo faded and cut to a scene of two men fighting. "I'm afraid I failed to see the connection," Dr. Kane said, frowning as one of the half-naked brutes smashed the other's head in with a fist-sized rock. "Oh, but Dr. Kane, this vulgar, violent, and morally abhorrent show is entering its second season. As a surprise guest, the producer has captured a singular individual in whom I have maintained an intense interest for over a decade." Dr. Kane arched a dark brow. She could not imagine where this conversation was going. "Oh?" Dart smiled, big and toothy and smug. "Have you ever heard the legend of Camp Crystal Lake?" Dr. Kane thought she remembered something about a series of brutal murders committed at an old campground somewhere in upstate New Jersey, not far from where she had attended graduate school. The story was told in breathless whispers by her fellow students at SUNY, New Paltz, retold with more lurid detail each year, as if it had happened last summer. But to Dr. Kane's surprise, there actually seemed to be a grain of truth in the wild stories. As Dart detailed the apparent immortality of this legendary Jason Voorhees, Dr. Kane found herself intrigued and fascinated in spite of herself. What could be causing this near-deathless state? And more importantly, how could it be used, harnessed to her immortality virus, and made to serve her goals? If only they could get a sample of DNA from this undead killer. Dr. Kane felt sure the answer to all their questions would be within her grasp. "Jason is currently being transported down to a small island off the Pacific coast of Costa Rica for the filming of Extreme Elimination," Dart told her. "I have arranged a team to collect your DNA sample and set up a portable lab where they can splice Jason's DNA into our designer virus, under your video-linked supervision, of course." He flashed another wide, swarmy smile and farted again, this time a whole gaseous sound of varying pitch and intensity. "So, Dr. Kane, how soon can you prepare a sample of our little science project?" Dr. Kane returned his smile, something she rarely did. If you did not know her, you would never know that the tiny twitch at the corner of her full, sexy lips was meant to be a smile. Without another word, she turned on her heel and left. So much preparation to be done, and so little time. Okay, guys, this has been an extra upload with chapters 4 and 5 of Friday the 13th, The Jason Strain. These were a couple short chapters, and I had a little bit of free time on my hands, and I thought it'd be nice to drop a couple extra chapters today for you guys. So there it is. A little more of the side stories that are going on in this book are coming into fruition. Let me know what you think of them. And I'll be back tomorrow with some more of Friday the 13th, The Jason Strain. The next chapter, chapter 6, is really long. I checked. So I may only be doing chapter 6 tomorrow. We'll just have to see how it goes. Until next time, this is your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening. And don't click that thumbs down button, because
it's got a death curse!